Can we just call it how it is? Somebody is doing my boy Jason Momoa really bad. The last time that we saw him in Minecraft, he was wearing an ugly pink jacket. He looked like a buffoon. And now he looks like some sort of drag queen. I'm not kidding you. There are certain angles where he kind of looks like one of my older aunts. He needs to fire his agent immediately. How the mighty have fallen. Remember when back in the day he was Aquaman? Maybe he could do that again. I have no idea. Anyways, all jokes aside, let's get straight into today's video because we do have quite a few things to talk about, quite a few things to cover. I did want to kind of dissect the new Supergirl situation. I'm not going to get too in-depth with it, but I just wanted to give you guys my personal take, my perspective on what's happening with that project. Now, we know that as of the moment of this recording, the movie is set to premiere just in a couple of weeks. What's really interesting is the corner that James Gunn has essentially backed himself into. Like, there are no options now. He definitely needs to have an insane success run here to be able to hold on to his position. I definitely feel like he's in the hot seat. Now, just to break down a little bit of what's been happening with the DC universe, we know that there is a Green Lantern show that's coming out on Max very soon. We know that there were a couple of shows that he had, a couple of projects that he worked on. There was a Creature Commando, and then there was the Peacemaker show. Both of them, I mean, it's kind of difficult to gauge exactly how much profit those shows made because, you know, it's basically just based on the subscription count. And I'm assuming that the budget is kind of split amongst all of the different projects that they're going to add to the streaming service. So I don't necessarily feel like there's any way of being able to tell, or I'm sure there is, but it's not as profitable as what they could make at the box office. Right now, the latest Superman film, which by the way I thoroughly enjoyed, I thought it was phenomenal. Amazing storytelling. It's very convoluted. It's extremely gray, which I definitely enjoyed. Very grounded, very realistic. Every action that Superman takes has consequences, and I genuinely feel like it's something that previous Superman films have never quite been able to capture. So I thought it was absolutely amazing. However, it didn't make a ton of money. Like, if you go back and you look at the budget, it was roughly well over 400 million, or a little bit over 400 million, including the production costs and all the marketing, and then it would go on to make a little over 600 million. So it wasn't a complete flop. I mean, it was marginally successful, but it was definitely a film that underperformed at the box office. I think DC or Warner Bros. was expecting it to hit close to $1 billion, which is pretty comparable to what films have been hitting, or some comic book films have been hitting. However, not recently. Aside from No Way Home, almost every other comic book movie that has hit the theaters has gravely underperformed, right? I mean, we've seen, for example, Morbius, we've seen Craven, Ant-Man Quantumania. We saw recently a similar situation with the Fantastic Four, as well as Thunderbolts. Now, I'm not sitting here telling you guys that James Gunn is going to lose his job after Supergirl, but I definitely feel like his leash is going to shorten up after this particular project. Now, granted, the budget for this film is projected to be much smaller or scaled down to an extent compared to the Superman film. This film is supposed to have a budget under 400 million with everything accounted for. The problem is that there are websites out there are some analysts projecting this movie won't even be able to make its money back. Assuming that everything goes according to plan and, you know, these numbers are being run correctly, this film is supposed to make under $200 million, which would be an absolutely catastrophic failure. Now, look, again, let's assume that James Gunn gets an opportunity, which he already did, to release his first Superman film, which was a little bit disappointing, 600 million. But let's assume that he's allowed to continue after Supergirl. Let's assume that these projections are correct and it makes roughly about $200 million, which is a complete bomb. And then his next project, which I believe is Superman Man of Tomorrow, let's assume that he also gets the opportunity to release that, and it's also very lackluster, or it basically runs into the same problem that the original Superman film runs into. I just don't see how they're going to continue to have him at the helm. I said how I thought, you know, the original Superman film from James Gunn was absolutely phenomenal, but he did run across some pitfalls, in my opinion. One of the bigger ones was the fact that he went with the Lex Luthor storyline yet again. That makes absolutely no sense to me. I mean, he had an opportunity to do something creative, to do something innovative, which James Gunn is very well known for. You know, he is at the helm of Guardians of the Galaxy. He's just done some absolutely brilliant things in the past, and that's what he's known for. You know, that witty comedy, great action sequences, great storytelling, three-dimensional characters that are extremely flawed, that the fan base or the audience can definitely relate to. And unfortunately, that's not what we saw with Superman. I mean, everything about the story and everything about the characters was phenomenal, but the main plot line just seemed like we'd seen it before. I think as I mentioned earlier, I think the 600 million was basically mostly just the hardcore fans. I think the casuals weren't brought into this because they immediately thought it's the bald dude storyline again. It's the dude with the kryptonite. It just feels like it's been played to death. I thought that he had a great opportunity here to give us like some brand new villains, perhaps like a Mongol, or he could have done something with, for example, Brainiac. He could have also done some, weird, obscure storylines featuring like maybe some like low level detective noir film featuring like Gordon, something along those lines, or perhaps just do what he did at Marvel, which was, formulate a game plan around a team that is a little bit more obscure or a little bit less known. For example, the Justice Gang, that storyline would have been phenomenal. That could have been his first film. Or he could have done the Teen Titans, which, people have been clamoring for quite some time, a Teen Titans live action film. The possibilities are endless, and Superman, as good of a film as it was, I don't think that's the reason that they brought James Gunn on board. They clearly thought that he was somebody that thought out of the box, that was creative, that had a very innovative mind, that was going to push the boundaries. And unfortunately, Superman just doesn't really do that. Now, Supergirl is a completely different story. The film does also look phenomenal and has, some great character development and some great plot lines. Unfortunately, it's coming on the heels of Superman, which was already underperforming. Now, we know that for the longest time, the DC universe has just been very convoluted and has always run into a ton of problems when it comes down to the box office. We know the Snyderverse was not extremely successful. And, I thought they should have fleshed out the Reeves universe as well. That's another great example of just Warner Bros. Not being able to fully capitalize on the projects that are making them money. That film went on to make, I believe, like about $800 million. And that was still during the pandemic time when people were still social distancing and were just not very interested in going to watch movies. So there was definitely something there that they could have built on. And unfortunately, they kind of reverted back to what we know Warner Bros. To do, which is just to play it incredibly safe and just, run into a brick wall. They have a great opportunity here with James Gunn. I'm not sure if it was his decision or if these were his choices or if this is the studio kind of pulling the strings behind the scenes. But unfortunately, Supergirl's apparently it's going to be an absolutely catastrophic disaster. It's not going to be able to make its money back. And the next project is another Superman movie. I just feel like he could have done so many different things. He could have pulled from so many different storylines. He could have given us, as I said, like origin stories based on characters that we've never seen. We've seen Superman films. We've seen Batman films. We've even seen Wonder Woman as recently as a few years ago. So I think James Gunn definitely had to bring something that we hadn't seen before to the table. And unfortunately, that's not what we got at all. I just want to see prime James Gunn back on the helm, but I don't think that's going to happen. And I do believe that the project after Supergirl is going to be like a make it or break it type of situation from James Gunn. I don't think that Warner Bros. Is going to allow him to just continue to waste a ton of money, a ton of effort and time to either just break even on these projects or to lose just a ton of money. Now, we do live in a time frame where streaming can always be a little bit of a safety net. I've talked about this in previous videos, but basically a lot of these movies that sometimes bomb at the box office can actually be extremely successful on the back end, whether that's like downloads, whether that's people actually purchasing the films or whether that's just them going to a streaming service and it garnering a ton of attention. So it just really depends on the film. But when you're talking about big blockbusters where you're spending hundreds of millions of dollars just to get the film launched, it has to have its return. And there's just no way, I think, moving past Supergirl, whatever the next project is, if it's a Superman film and it bombs, there's just no way that they continue to be patient with James Gunn. I think that would literally be the nail in the coffin up to this point. It's been very frustrating because I do feel like James Gunn definitely has the creative mind and the ability to be able to bring one of the best DC cinematic universe that we've ever seen. But unfortunately, I'm not sure exactly what's holding him back. Is it the studio? Is it him just kind of losing his edge? Only time will tell. I'm very curious to see what all of you guys have to say. Let me know down below in the comment section. Do you guys agree, disagree? Do you think that James Gunn is on a little bit of a short leash, or do you believe this is just a minor little bump on the road and they'll eventually kind of get back on track? I'm very curious to see what you guys have to say. Also, how much money do you think Supergirl will make at the box office? Will it bomb? Will it at least make its money back? I'm very curious to see what you guys have to say. Let me know down below. Thank you guys so much for tuning in, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Thank you.